All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you again for joining us. My name is Jonathan Adelist with the FreeMind Group, and this webinar today will be on non-dilutive funding for non-U.S. applicants. This is part of our FreeMind Summer School, and basically every Wednesday we have a webinar on a various different subject related to non-dilutive funding and the non-dilutive funding landscape. So today, as I mentioned, is non-dilutive funding for non-U.S. applicants. And as an example, next week, our webinar will be on non-dilutive funding opportunities in the cancer space. So if that is relevant for you, I definitely recommend registering for that as well. And okay, let's get started. So in a nutshell, just to give you an idea of who's speaking with you today and the company and what we do. So we're basically a consulting firm. We've been in this business for about 15 years now. We have about 40 full-time employees on staff. We work across the life sciences with top institutes in academia and also throughout the industry, small startups and all the way up to big pharma. We submit more or less about 250 applications every year for our various clients, and so basically we've really amassed a great deal of experience and expertise in this area, especially with large-scale applications in which we enjoy a fairly impressive success rate, if I may say so myself. Generally, we view ourselves as a tool that helps you maximize your funding potential. And we do this, first of all, by identifying the most relevant funding opportunities. No matter how good your science is, if it's not submitted correctly or to the right place or to the right through the right mechanism, then you probably will not be awarded. Also, what we like to do is strategizing, and I'll touch on generally how you should strategize. But in a nutshell, we strategize to maximize the application's chances of an award, and this can be through feedback from program officers, understanding of the funding agency and what they're interested in funding, what's aligned with their interests and their mission. Also, we manage complex project production processes. This could be multi-PI and multifaceted grants, and managing the whole project and really making it come together to one coherent proposal. We lead the joint application writing and also support any final contract negotiations. But enough about us. Let's talk about what we're really here to discuss, and that's basically non-dilutive funding, and specifically for non-U.S. applicants. So just a bit of an overview of the general funding scene. There are, as you are probably well aware, three general areas that funding for R&D and life sciences can come from. That would be the public markets, IPOs, etc., private funding, VCs and angels, and what we're here to discuss today, which is non-dilutive funding. That could be government agencies, private foundations, and things of that sort. And I'll prefix this now, and I'll touch on this again a little bit onwards. By no means am I advocating you focus only on non-dilutive funding. If your company is positioned for an IPO, by all means do that. Private funding is fantastic, and you should definitely go for that as well. Basically, you need a balanced campaign. An interesting study by the Milken Institute found some very, very interesting statistics that I think put this in a positive perspective. One of their conclusions was that for every dollar that you're able to raise from public funding, from non-dilutive funding, you will actually be able to attract $8.38 from the private sector in investments. And this is obviously the value of $1 million is $1 million. I'm not saying that if you raise $1 million, it will instantly become $9.4 million. But what I am saying is that when you attract public funding, what you're receiving beyond the funds themselves is kind of a quality assurance stamp. You've basically gone through the most rigorous peer review process and vetting that exists right now for this area of science, and they've found you to be top-notch science. And smart investors are looking for that when they decide where to invest. So there really is a lot of added value. Another issue here that is relevant to one of the most common questions, if not the most common question I get asked when talking to businesses that are non-U.S. is, why would the U.S. government want to fund me? And that's a legitimate question. Now I'll start by saying that I am not employed by the U.S. government, nor do I have any intentions to be, so I don't know if I can really speak on their behalf. But I can try to shed some light on the logic behind this, and one of those points that does kind of bring it into perspective is the fact that the same study found that for every dollar the U.S. government spends on R&D in life sciences, their ROI is actually $2.3. Now, obviously, this is not a direct return on investment. They're not asking for any IP or royalties or anything like that. And I'll kind of touch on how they do see the money come back to them further on. But I just think it's an interesting statistic. Another very interesting fact is that historically, half of the drugs that received eventually FDA approval, at some point during the course of the research and development leading to that drug's approval, they received funding from the NIH, from the government. And there is a chicken and egg issue here, and it's really hard to say whether the fact that it was top-notch science and very promising idea led to the fact that it was funded and also led to the fact that it was approved. Or looking at it from the other direction, it may be the fact that they received that vetting and that approval and that money that pushed them forward and allowed them to kind of jump the hurdles on the way and really reach the finish line. And to be honest, the real answer is probably a little bit of both. But regardless of if the answer is the chicken or the egg or both the chicken and the egg, what I think the real take-home message here is that once you have joined that group and received government funding, you have definitely improved your chances of reaching your goals. And that's basically what I think you really need to take into consideration. Generally, and I touched on this in the beginning, like I said, I'm not asking you to neglect other sources of funding. What we're really advocating here is a balanced campaign. But that being said, I definitely think, and I think I'm going to be able to show you why, government funding and non-dilutive funding really should and even need to be part of that balanced campaign. Just to give you an idea of the costs and details on a comparison between a funding campaign from VCs versus a non-dilutive funding campaign. So in a standard VC fundraising campaign, you would spend anywhere between $60,000 and $100,000 depending on the scope of the campaign. 120, excuse me. It would generally be about a 600-hour endeavor, more or less. And of course, being VC funding, it would come at the cost of equity. In contrast to that, a non-dilutive funding campaign would be about $30,000 to $40,000, and that's including the external assistance for that campaign. Time-wise, it would be about 300 hours, and the cost of the capital would be nothing. It's non-dilutive, so there's no royalties, no matching funds, nothing like that. So again, and I really want to reiterate this, the point of this comparison is not to say this is better than that or that is better than this and you should do this and not that. But really what I would like you to take from here is that yes, VCs and angels and IPOs and all the other options are a very important part of how to fund a company. But if you choose to neglect non-dilutive funding, you are definitely missing out on one of the major sources of funding that are available. So let's take a look at the actual pockets of money here, and in total, it's estimated to be about $50 billion that are allocated annually through non-dilutive funding from the U.S. government and private foundations in the United States, and most of that comes from the NIH throughout all its 27 institutes and centers, from other HHS organizations as well, and I'll be giving an example of one of those today as well, although all of them do fund extensively and non-U.S. companies as well. And another major source is the Department of Defense through the U.S. Army, DARPA, DITRA, CDMRPs, various mechanisms that are all fantastic sources of funding and as well do fund non-American companies, and private foundations as well. If you take a look at the NIH budget, and the details here are not really very important, but basically it's a very large budget. It's $29.1 billion annually. And the interesting fact is that the vast majority of that money is going externally, extramural research. So a very small fraction of that is actually staying in the NIH. To be exact, it's about it's closer to $24.5 billion that are being allocated outwards, be that through research grants, R&D contracts, research training, really various mechanisms, but all this money is going out and this money is available. If you want to really understand where the money is going, so I kind of prepared this slide as a way to see the different areas the funding is being funneled into, and this is not mutually exclusive. So, for example, if research is funded, research on, for example, I don't know, brain tumors, then it would be here under neurosciences and cancer as well, and maybe even brain disorders. So this is for each area the entire sum of money that's going into it, so if you add them up, and they won't add up to the real NIH budget. And also there are missing indications here. I only selected some relevant ones. But the point would be that you can take a look and see that there are should be a lot of money that is available to you in your research area. Some of the major ones that are popular areas of research are neuroscience is $5.5 billion, cancer $5.5 billion, infectious diseases up this year from $4 to $5 billion. So there really is there are substantial amounts of money that are going to fund R&D in the life sciences in various areas, and that's basically the point here. So let's talk about more specifically about non-U.S. organizations and entities. I'll start with the bottom line. The bottom line is yes, you can win awards, a lot of them, most of them. And there's a lot of money going outwards from the United States. As an example, the figures for this year are not final yet, but last year, 2013, there were 1,124 awards being paid to non-U.S. organizations. The total of that was $1.3 billion, and that's just what was being paid last year. If, for example, you win an RO1 for $2.5 million, and you're getting, that's over 5 years, and you're getting $500,000 a year. So this total would actually only include the $500,000 you received in 2013. So the sum is actually substantially larger than that. And if we're any indication, for example, and I think we are, about 20% of the submissions that we submit are for non-U.S. clients. So it's a real part of the market. Basically, the bottom line here is that the chances you have of receiving an award are a reflection of your science and your application and how it's constructed and how it's presented. It is not a reflection of geography. I'm going to go back for a second and touch on the question of why would the American government fund a non-U.S. entity. And again, I can't give you a definitive answer on behalf of the government, But I think this is an interesting insight to that. Basically, you have to understand what the NIH mission is. The NIH is charged with seeking fundamental knowledge about the nature and behavior of living systems and the application of that knowledge to enhance health, lengthen life, and reduce illness and disability. Now, currently, the U.S. healthcare burden is estimated at about $2.7 trillion. It's also expected to almost double by 2019. And like I mentioned earlier, they're not receiving an immediate return on their investment when they're funding a company that conducts research, because they're not getting any equity or royalties or anything like that. But when new innovations reach the market, it reduces the healthcare burden, and since the numbers here are so substantial, it's really worthwhile for them. Basically, that's what I'm getting at. When you do submit as a foreign entity, you'll need to fill out what's called a foreign justification. And basically what you'll have to do here is explain why the research has to be conducted by your company abroad. Essentially, in our experience, this is a very low hurdle. It's really not much of an issue. Usually we advise our clients to basically follow the direction should be either or both, either reasoning with specific expertise or knowledge or key personnel that are in a specific location. If your ideas are based on the research of a certain professor, and that professor is a professor at Cambridge, or if he works at the Max Planck Institute, then that's where the research should be conducted. It's very simple, and that's all the reason you need. Or specific IP. If there's a great idea for a great solution for something that is of interest to the NIH, and the IP is owned by a company in Belgium, then that's where it will happen. And these are completely sufficient answers. And we find that usually when there's any issues with the foreign justification, it's usually because there are issues with the science. I've never seen an application where they loved the science and had problems with the foreign justification. That's just my experience, but it's pretty accurate, I would say. So basically, yes, a non-US entity can definitely win awards, most of the awards. There are some solicitations and mechanisms that are not available for non-US companies. SBIRs would be a prime example of that. But the vast majority are open to anyone. I'd like to emphasize some of the difference. I just suspect that many of our listeners here today are from Europe. So I'd like to emphasize some of the differences between this type of funding and non-dilutive funding that would be what you were probably used to in the European Union, Horizon 2020 or others. So first of all, there's no matching funds. It's 100% grant money. You receive it in full in the beginning of the working year. And additionally, you get an 8% overhead on top of that, actually. No royalty payments whatsoever. Another interesting difference is that in the NIH, for example, anywhere annually between 60 and 70% of the awards are awarded through non-solicited mechanisms, investigator-initiated, which means basically you would approach the NIH with your ideas. The relevant study section would review them, and eventually, if you are funded, you would be funded by the relevant agency in the NIH. But it would not be an answer to a specific solicitation or a specific idea that they have and they want to advance research in a defined area. It really is just you pitching your ideas to them. And that's something that is rarer in other, well, basically, it's less prevalent in Europe. There's no need for consortiums. You don't need a chemist in Italy and a molecular biologist in England and a German project manager, and the HPLC should be France. There's no need for that. You need a complete project. You need well-defined beginning, and you need all the facets and the aspects to be addressed and well presented. So if you do need a collaboration because you're weaker in a specific area, then by all means collaborate. But it doesn't need to be a consortium. The people relevant for the application could all be in the same country. They could all be in the same city. And to be completely honest, they could all be roommates. It really doesn't matter. It's science-centered. There's absolutely no geography to do with it. The people who review this are not government officials. They're not politicians. They're scientists, and they read the applications, and they grade them on scientific merit, and that really is. And I'll touch on the exact process, at least in the NIH, in a few slides. Another difference is, and this one is very interesting. For example, the Horizon 2020 budget for the entire life science field is 24.3 billion euros. That's over 7 years. So that's about 3.5 billion euros a year. And the NIH budget per year on its own, without the DoD and without the other HHS organizations, without the private foundations, alone is 22 billion euros a year. So it's by far the most substantial source of funding available. There's really no competition. In terms of the actual routes to achieving to receiving the funding, so I touched on this. Basically, there's the solicited applications where a specific agency or institute will ask for proposals in a very specific defined area of research. If that is aligned with what you're planning to do, then you go ahead and submit, and hopefully you're awarded. Unsolicited is what I touched on earlier. It's basically you pitching your ideas to them, and I'll give you a bit more specific examples in a second. And the third option is BAAs, broad agency announcements. Usually these are larger scale solicitations. They're quite a hefty document to prepare one, and they usually would address a slightly wider area of research. For example, a solicitation could be furthering the treatment of dengue fever in Eastern Africa, and then a BAA would be novel antivirals and antibacterials. So it's much broader. It's still defined, but it's a broader area of research. Diving into really the specific agencies that are awarding funds to non-American entities. So first and foremost is the NIH. And I'll touch on the two mechanisms, the two routes, the solicited and unsolicited. So if you're looking for a solicited opportunity, basically what you would do is you would go on grants.nih.gov and insert your keyword into the search. It could be the bug you're working on, or the medical condition, etc., etc. And you would find, hit enter, and you would find a list of solicitations that are generally in the area. You'd have to read through them and find hopefully a few that are really aligned with exactly what you want to do. And there are substantial amounts of solicitations like this. For example, just checked today, and there were over 950 solicitations at the moment, specific solicitations. So this is a great source of funding. On the other hand, sometimes there's not something that's really a perfect fit for you. And as I mentioned, 60 or 70%, depending on the year, of the funding being allocated by the NIH is actually funded in this form. So basically, there are two main ways to approach this, and that depends mostly on the stage of your research. R21s, an unsolicited R21 would be an NIH Exploratory Developmental Research Grant Program. And the funding is generally $275,000 over 2 years, plus an 8% overhead, so that comes up to be roughly $300,000, and that's for earlier stage and proof of concept kind of research, no preliminary data needed. And on the other hand, R01s, which is meant to fund a bit more advanced projects, more advanced science, that you definitely do need preliminary data to apply here. And the difference would be in the funding and the time over which you would be receiving that funding. So the funding here is up to $500,000 a year for up to 5 years, plus the 8% overhead again, which comes roughly around $2.7 million, which is that's a nice amount of funding. Deadlines for these mechanisms, the upcoming deadline for the R01s is October 5th and R21s is October 16th, and they have the similar deadlines in February and June. Every year it's February, June, and October. And so definitely keep that in mind, especially if you want to go for the October deadline. I advise you to start working with haste if you have not started yet. Just to kind of give you a general idea of and kind of drive home the point about the NIH funding non-U.S. companies. So this is a map. This is taken from the NIH site itself, and basically this is all the non-U.S. awards and that they have been giving. This is for last year. So the ones in North America are actually in Canada. That's why you're seeing them there. It's all non-U.S. And so you see a lot of awards in Canada and all over Europe, Israel, all over the world, basically. And this is a nice example of a company that received a very impressive award from the NIH. Crucell, a Dutch company, received a few years ago up to $69.1 million in a contract with NIAID for development of influenza treatment that involved monoclonal antibodies. Just to show you that there's really no limit. If you're in the right position and you have the right ideas, they will fund you. There's no question about that. And the review process in which they decide who to fund is an interesting process, and it's basically a risk assessment process. And what they do is that they weigh the strengths that you're able to convey and the strength of your ideas and the impact against the risks that are entailed in your proposition. And the way they do that basically is scoring it on 5 different criteria. The first being leadership. Are the key personnel experienced enough? Are they really experts? Do you have the right expertise? The PI, the environment. Do you have the needed lab space? Any additional things that are needed? Really, are you ready environment-wise for the research? The significance of the research, how important would advances in this field be? Is it really significant to public health? And how innovative is it? Is this really a new idea that will change something? These are all areas where you definitely need to, the answer to all those 4 questions basically needs to be yes. But what will ultimately decide if you're awarded or not, given that the answer was yes in the other areas, is your scientific approach. A top-notch scientific approach, the milestones, everything really needs to be top-notch science and to be conveyed as such. And basically, you have to be both responsive to what they're looking to fund and competitive. And this is exactly that. This is how you do that. BARDA is a wonderful agency as well to receive funding from, and for various reasons. What BARDA is basically, well, first of all, they're charged with developing and procuring, and I know I'm stressing the point on procuring, and I'll get back to that. Developing and procuring medical countermeasures that address chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear accidents, incidents, and attacks pandemic influenza and emerging infectious diseases. And a very interesting and great thing about BARDA is because part of what they're charged with doing is also procuring the medical countermeasures. If they do fund you and you do achieve your goals and you come up with a final product that is FDA approved, etc., so they not only will fund you on the way, they will actually purchase your product from you in large quantities. So you end up with both funding and your first major customer as well. So that's a very interesting fact about them. Additionally, what they're looking to fund basically is kind of to pick up where the NIH leaves off. NIH will usually do funding for preclinical activities and sometimes phase 1 clinical trials, but they don't go too far down the process beyond that. They do sometimes, but as a general rule, it's harder to obtain NIH funding when you're in more advanced clinical trials. And that's where BARDA really picks up. What they're looking for is promising phase 1 data or very interesting preclinical data with a lot of potential. And they really pick you up there and fund you moving forward. Another interesting thing about BARDA is they're very responsive. If you contact them and you can ask for what they call a tech watch, and then you can go meet them and present them with your science. And this is before you even apply. And they'll really review it with you. They'll give you pointers, and they'll basically ask you questions, find out what's happening, and they'll generally tell you if you're ready for BARDA or you're not ready for BARDA, and if you're not, what they think you should do to become ready for BARDA. So they're very approachable and very easy to work with. And for example, the current solicitations that they have is one for advanced development of medical countermeasures for pandemic influenza. Influenza is of great interest to BARDA. Research and development of chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear medical countermeasures, and science and technology platforms applied to medical countermeasure development. So if you're in one of these areas, again, I really do highly recommend. And they fund other things. These are the ones that are specifically open now. Generally, funding from BARDA is not capped, so there's no limit on how much money you can ask for. It does have to be correlated. I mean, you have to justify it in the scope of the work that you propose to carry out. If you should not ask for too much or too little, for that matter. And as an example, Basilea won 89 million. From BARDA. They were awarded for research in antibiotics, and this was about a year ago, I think. Yes, pretty much exactly a year ago. So again, this is just to prove that non-U.S. companies can be awarded and awarded big time. So the typical process in the DoD and in BARDA, for that matter, is basically you start off with a white paper. White paper is a high view, really high level overview of your project and what you propose. It's typically 2, sometimes 5, sometimes 8, no more than 10 pages. Usually 2, actually, and actually that's not easy to do sometimes, because making a very good 2-pager can be sometimes a lot more difficult than making a very good 20-pager. But that's a completely different issue. The interesting thing is this is the major cutoff stage, meaning most of the applications will not pass this stage. Most of the white papers that are sent are not asked to submit a full application. Typically, after you submit, and these are open year-round, so there's no specific deadline, but typically 90 days after you submit your white paper, you'll receive an answer asking you to, hopefully asking you to submit a full application. From that point on, you'll have, depending, anywhere between 45 and 90 days to prepare the full application, and that's not a lot of time to prepare a full application of this magnitude. So you really have to start, with full throttle. A lot of work there. Definitely worth it if you win, and especially you have much higher chances once you reach this stage. But it's a serious endeavor. So after you submit that, it will be reviewed for technical merit, and typically within 180 days you will be notified if you are awarded or not. At that point, you enter cost proposal and negotiations, and hopefully are awarded. So that's the process generally in DoD and in BARDA. And I'd like to just give you a general overview of the mechanisms under the Department of Defense. So first of all, DARPA is a great agency. Their mission is basically to maintain the technological superiority of the United States military. And they do that by sponsoring revolutionary, high payoff research that bridges the gap between fundamental discoveries and their military use. So basically, and it's even in the wording of their mission, they're looking for really revolutionary research. Kind of like Q in James Bond. They're looking for groundbreaking ideas. It's a great place. You don't need much more than some great ideas and some initial data, and they'll fund you if they like your idea, obviously. But it's a great place if you have some really interesting, non-conventional, groundbreaking ideas. DTRA was basically charged with guarding the United States and its allies from WMDs, weapons of mass destruction, and so any research in that area, category A, B, and C, pathogens, etc., that would be the place to look for funding. And the U.S. military itself, the USA MRMC, provides solutions to medical problems of importance to the American warfighter at home and abroad. So there has to be a military angle, a specific military angle approaching here. And all of these agencies award substantial amounts of funding. I want to kind of take a step back and look at generally how you should approach obtaining this sort of funding. And so generally, the first thing you should know is really understand the interests of the agency. You have to understand what the current trends and what they're looking for are, what they have funded in the past, what they haven't funded in the past, why. It helps to have people to talk to in the agency, program officers. It really substantially can not only help you choose what to submit and where, but also how to present your science in a way that is most well aligned with what they're looking to fund. You have to focus your project application. It has to be a really well-defined project. I have to stress this. They do not fund companies. None of the mechanisms and the agencies that we discussed fund companies. They're not funding your company. They're funding your project. And so it has to be a very coherent, concise project, well-defined, and really well-presented. You have to ask for what's necessary, and I kind of touched on this. Don't ask for too much. They'll scrutinize that. And don't ask for too little. They won't think you really have an understanding of what you want to do. You have to present a complete project. I touched on that. And also leverage on research collaborations. If you have specific areas that maybe you're not as strong in, then you have to patch that up. You have to find a solution to that. It could be collaborations, hiring somebody that is an expert, but generally the point is you have to have a complete project. And also you have to target the right mechanism. There are really a plethora of different pockets of money. You have to know which one is most relevant, not only in title and in general scope, but also specifically, and with the specifics, what they're looking to fund right now. There are various different sizes of awards, different success rates, also something to take into consideration. And something we think is very important is also conducting a thorough strategic assessment, really looking at this as a strategic source of income over time. And we advise you not to just, have a try, one go. If it works, great. If it doesn't, then too bad. That works sometimes, and that's wonderful. But if you really want to make non-dilutive funding a strategic source of income, you have to take a more strategic, diligent approach, strategize over time where you're going to send, what you're going to send, and so on. And that's basically what I was getting to, is a multi-submission granting strategy, which is something that we find is key in obtaining non-dilutive funding. So a few words about how exactly we go about doing this. So that basically what I said. We have two core services. The first one is the strategic assessment, the strategic consulting. And we start out by doing this, but it's also an ongoing process over the entire period that we work with the client. And that would be exactly what I outlined. Reaching out, our analysts would reach out. First of all, they would obviously have obtain a very good understanding of exactly the science that is being carried out, and the plans for the future on a really detailed level, milestones, everything. And then they would go ahead and link those projects and sub-projects and milestones with available pockets of money. And the outcome would be basically kind of a list of opportunities and basically the multi-submission granting strategy. And then the second service we provide is the actual grant writing, wherein basically our clients work with our project managers, our grant consultants, and that process is essentially kind of a back and forth ping pong process. Our consultants start out with any initial data that the clients supply them, previous submissions, anything like that, slide decks, executive summaries, anything you have, and they insert that into specific templates that are adhered to the specific guidelines of the solicitation that they're pursuing at that instance. And then from there on, and that's basically the first draft, and from there on in, it's an ongoing iterative review kind of back and forth, where we insert questions and comments, rewrite sections, send it back and forth until we've really maximized the chances of an award. And that's basically how we advise going about it. So this is kind of an overview of the process. We start with your R&D funding needs. That transfers on to our analysts who basically create the multi-submission granting strategy in the long run, and in the short term, and we execute that granting strategy and produce grants, and finally hopefully the granting agency will review it favorably and we will be awarded. So that's it for the actual subject at hand. At this time, I think I will answer some questions if there are any. I think maybe I should have mentioned this in the beginning, and I didn't. But if you have any questions, I see there are questions, so I guess that's okay. But if you have any questions, feel free to add them now in the comments, in the question section, and I'll try to answer as many as possible for as long as time as we have, which is not a lot. Also, I would like to mention at this time, this will be on YouTube, and you'll be receiving a mail with a slide deck and with the link to the YouTube video of the presentation. So let me start here. So there's some thank you, you're quite welcome. Okay. There's some very specific questions that I think I'll rather answer in emails. Okay, there's a question here I kind of touched on, but maybe I didn't elaborate on. Do we need a U.S. collaborator? So basically the answer is yes and no. You need a collaborator in general if you need a collaborator. You need, as I mentioned, a complete project. You need all areas of research to be addressed. And if you need a collaborator, then yes, you need a collaborator. That being said, it needs to be the best collaborator possible, and a lot of those are in the United States. But if that collaborator is not in the United States, if he's at Oxford, that's absolutely fine. There's no issue there. If he's in Germany, if he's in France, if he's in Sweden, if he's in Belgium, it does not matter. If he's in Canada, if he's in Australia, it's all valid. If he's the person you need, then where his office is really not an issue. Let's see other things. Wait a second. Okay, this is an interesting question that gets asked a lot. So basically the question is, does a company need to initially have the internal lab space and resources, or can it be outsourced? And the answer is, well, it does depend on the mechanism, but pretty much the vast majority of the cases is you can state in the application that even you will use the funding to hire people and rent lab space. That's fine. Or outsource it to a CRO. All of these are very valid answers. So generally that would be the case. It's very possible. There are specific solicitations that want a specific percentage of the work to be conducted at in-house, and even in those cases there are ways around that, depending on exactly how you work with the CRO. But this is very specific. So if anyone has a more detailed question than that, I'd be happy to answer that either over the phone or through emails. But generally, yes, it's very possible. Okay, that is a good question. If we have a U.S. collaborator, would it be better if he would be the lead, basically he would be the applicant and we would be a collaborator, or the other way around? Sometimes that's better, sometimes it isn't. It really depends on the scope of work. It depends on who he is and who you are. Categorically, the answer is sometimes, but not because he's American and you're not. But again, that really depends on the specifics of the case. Another question here. I think this may be the last one because we don't have that much time. Will you help set up meetings with agencies to explore unsolicited proposals? Well, generally it's not a meeting. Usually we reach out to we absolutely do reach out to program officers and receive their feedback and kind of get an idea of how maybe to tweak the proposal or maybe send it to a different agency. Yeah, so the answer is yes, we definitely do that. It's usually over email and not through a meeting, but yes, or the phone. Okay, one last question is maybe regarding how we get paid. Generally, we work on a success-oriented model. We receive a 6% success fee on the back end of any awards announced, awarded. And to cover our overhead, we do take a retainer. The height of the retainer is a reflection, basically, of the size of the company, and more specifically, the scope of the R&D activities. So, for example, a small startup with one project would be paying a lot less than something the retainer we take from J&J, and big pharma companies were paying a lot more because the scope of work necessary is a lot higher, obviously. So that really depends. Okay, I think that's pretty much it. I would like to thank you very much for attending today, and hopefully we'll see you in some more of our webinars during the summer school. Thank you very much.